Bernie and the Beast, a Florida girl's short story, written and performed by Jordan Krumbine. The air smelled like rain. Bernie glanced to the sky, looking up past the low-level, fan-shaped fronds of the ubiquitous palmetto through a canopy of pine needles and thin branches at a patch of sky burned bright blue. A hard line of dark gray hung in the sky at what looked to be just southwest of her current location. Bernie took a long breath, inhaling deeply through her nose. There was a crispness in the air, and traces of ozone tickled her sinuses. Next came notes of earth, grass, dirt, swamp, decaying plant, as a gust of wind swept through the trees, rustling the bed of browned and brittle pine needles covering the earth. She glanced in the opposite direction. Clear, blue sky. The larger opening in the tree line had been carved out by the lazy tributary Bernie was fishing in. It was getting late in the summer, and while a bad storm was a regular occurrence in the wetter of the Sunshine State's 2 seasons, Bernie was fairly certain she hadn't yet experienced a full-on hurricane. Another gust of wind made Bernie glance back toward the looming shelf of black clouds. After about 2 years alone in the Florida wilderness, there wasn't much that scared Bernie. Even after surviving the Great Fall and those endless, scorch-the-sky black swarms of poisonous bugs, the now 14-year-old girl had dealt with loneliness, hunger, a vengeful pack of wild boar, endless mosquitoes, and a straight-out-of-your-nightmares midnight Burmese python attack. Bernie was a tough girl, but even she didn't like her odds against a hurricane. And although she was situated as well as she could be toward the middle of the state, somewhere south of Kissimmee and what used to be the world's vacation destination, it wasn't like she had a concrete bunker to ride out sustained winds well beyond 100 miles per hour. And, again, it was getting very late in the season. Another gust of wind sucked the humidity from the air, and Bernie could feel the temperature drop several degrees. The exposed skin on her arms rose in goosebumps, and she could feel the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Hurricane or not, it was time to go. She pulled in her line and stowed the bait in a satchel with the day's catch. 2 medium-sized fish she figured were a type of bass, and a catfish. She cinched the bag shut and slung it over her shoulder, sheathing her hunting knife, a fixed 6-inch blade with a gut hook at the tip and a handle carved from black and brown wood with a bone inlay, and grabbed her makeshift fishing rod. Bernie turned southwest toward the oncoming storm and started hoofing it back to camp. Another gust of wind swept down from the sky to greet her, fresh air whipping against Bernie's face. The dropping temperature and the stiff breeze was quickly cooling the semi-permanent layer of sweat that Bernie had long since accepted as a constant companion. Something close to a shiver pricked at her spine. Splat! An angry, fat drop of rain slapped Bernie square in the forehead. She touched her finger to the wetness and glanced back at the storm clouds. She could see them moving, looming closer to her location, low-hanging wisps swirling in the air currents. A moment later, the storm clouds blotted out the sun. The light changed from a warm yellow to a dark bluish gray, and Bernie felt the temperature drop again. Thwip, 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 thwip. More fat drops of rain torpedoed the earth around Bernie, and the icy hand of anxiety reached up from her belly to grab her heart. Hurricane or not, this was going to be bad. Bernie broke into a run as the clouds opened up. The sound of her military boots slapping and crunching against the dry undergrowth was quickly drowned out by the rush of the rain. The trees provided minimal cover, and she quickly calculated she could try to wait out the storm underneath a clutch of palms. Those broad fronds, the best protection she'd be able to find this far from camp. But if this storm was the big one... Bernie dropped her chin to her chest and barreled forward, trying hard not to lose the narrow path she had cut into the underbrush over the years. A flash of lightning exploded nearby, and Bernie could smell the air burning. Rain slashed sideways, and thunder cracked overhead. There were no windows around to rattle in their frames, but Bernie could feel the thunder well enough deep in her bones. Her clothes, a tank top and a pair of jeans, were already soaked through and plastered to her body. She wiped a hand across her face and glanced around at the trees bending in the wind. This looked like the right path, but she wasn't sure. She turned again, suddenly confused by her surroundings. Step, stop, turn. The cold hand of anxiety gripped her chest tighter, and she wanted nothing more than to be back at camp. Another turn. Another step. Another crack. Yish! Bernie looked down and saw that the heavy sole of her boot had come down on a large egg, crushing half of it. Careful not to move her feet, Bernie turned and got a better look at where she was standing. There were more eggs. Maybe 2 or 3 dozen. Some had already cracked open. Amid the shells, Bernie spotted a large clump of stringy, wet hair. Wait, worse. A single, small, scaly appendage. She was standing in the middle of an alligator's nest. Alligators typically form mounds, covering their nests with a protective layer of dirt, mud, and debris. Something, maybe the mother alligator herself, had swept away the top layer of the mound, exposing the eggs underneath. Bernie's eyes were drawn again to the baby alligator leg that had been left behind. Alright, so maybe it wasn't Big Mama Gator that had exposed the mound? Bernie moved sideways, stepping gingerly out of the nest and offering a silent apology to the egg she had unknowingly crushed. The rain continued to pelt. Bernie's jaw clenched as she surveyed the area. She thought she had a pretty good idea which direction her camp was located, but the exposed nest of remaining alligator eggs was pulling at her conscience. About 7 feet away, Bernie spotted the scattered remains of the topmost covering of the mound. She let out an explosive grunt of frustration and pulled her satchel off her shoulder, dropping it to the soggy earth. She gathered an armful of the mound debris, carrying it back to the nest and spreading it as evenly as possible in the downpour. Another whipping glance around, and Bernie's gaze found the nearest palm tree. She grabbed her hunting knife and quickly hacked off 2 large fronds. She placed the fan-like branches across the alligator nest and then weighed them down with more muddy underbrush. She stepped back and surveyed her work, wiping the back of her hand across her mouth. Another flash of lightning. Another bone-rattling boom of thunder. The wind threatened to whip away the fresh palm fronds. It would have to do. Bernie gathered up her satchel and pushed further into the woods, desperately hoping she was heading in the right direction. The rain slapped her face and made time slow to a crawl. What felt like 30 minutes, the left side of Bernie's brain assured her couldn't have been more than 10. Finally, a fallen oak tree, still tenuously connected to its stump. A marker along the edge of the campsite Bernie called home. In the dimming light and through sheets of rain, she spotted the dull gray glint of home, a 19-foot airstream well over 60 years old. The aluminum exterior had been dulled with time, dirt, and mildew. Random sheets of metal formed a patchwork exoskeleton, scraps Bernie had scavenged and used to reinforce the Airstream's original structure. The trailer had a single axle. The tires were long gone, but the wheels had been planted on wide, solid blocks of wood. The trailer hitch was propped up on the stump of another oak tree. Since the trailer was already so small, Bernie had fashioned a lean-to using one side of the Airstream and a pine tree with a low-hanging branch about 6 feet away. She had woven a dense, thatched roof of palm fronds and mounted it as securely as she could to the trailer and the tree. Bernie had no idea how her little Airstream would hold up under hurricane-force winds, but she knew it was better than nothing. She hitched the strap of her satchel and stepped into the clearing, heading for the door of the Airstream, and then stopped short. Something was lurking under the lean-to. It was huddled in the furthest corner. She hadn't noticed it at first because of the rain, the thunder, and the dimming light. But as she started to approach the trailer, the thing turned its massive head and light glinted off dark eyes. Bernie's hand dropped to her sheathed hunting knife. The wind shifted, and Bernie suddenly found herself downwind from the lean-to. The smell of rotten eggs hit her, and Bernie lifted a hand to her mouth, a reflexive gag working her throat muscles. The thing under the lean-to let out a guttural huff, and Bernie could see its dark, massive bulk shift. The creature bumped into the trailer, and Bernie could see the airstream rock against the weight of the beast. This was no Burmese python. Lightning flashed, and Bernie glimpsed dark, matted hair, beady eyes, and a face. Another guttural huff, and Bernie swallowed hard, trying to calm her racing heart. Her eyes shifted to the door of the airstream and her theoretical path to safety. It sat between her and the beast, but was also well within reach of the creature under the lean-to. Something had to give. Bernie's fingers wrapped around the handle of her hunting knife, and she pulled it from its sheath. She could make a run for the door. It was unlocked. She could swing it open and slip inside, ride out the storm and the beast. If the creature attacked her on the way to the door, she could attack right back. This was Bernie's home. Or she could run, find another clutch of palmettos to shelter under. Pray to God this was just another afternoon thunderstorm and not the first wave feeder bands of a devastating hurricane. Bernie's eyes shifted from the beast to the door to the metal sheets of reinforcement and the nylon straps she used to anchor the airstream. No, this was Bernie's home. The blade went up in front of her, and Bernie shifted into a ready-to-launch stance, coiling her energy for a mad sprint to the door. She could feel the eyes from under the lean-to fixed on her. Thunder cracked. Now or never. Resisting the urge to unleash a bellowing battle cry, Bernie took off, with an explosive hiss out of her nose. Raindrops slicked off her skin. Puddles of mud exploded under the impact of Bernie's boots, and an angry, guttural hiss erupted from behind Bernie, bringing her to a skidding halt some 2 or 3 yards from the airstream door. The beast in front of her shifted under the lean-to and moved toward the door. Bernie risked a glance over her shoulder to identify the hiss and discovered the biggest alligator she'd ever seen in her life crawling over the fallen oak tree. It slid into the clearing, hissing and growling all the way. A burst of short, rapid-fire huffs sent Bernie's head spinning back around. The beast had moved to the front edge of the lean-to, hulking under the thatched roof, rain starting to spatter against its dense hair. Its eyes were narrow, and its brow furrowed in what even Bernie could identify as unbridled rage. Another hiss. Bernie spun again, just in time to see the gator's maw flash open as it bellowed something throaty and furious right before it sprinted forward. The beast under the lean-to roared, its sheer volume drowning out the alligator and the sleeting rain causing Bernie to bring her hands to her ears as she tumbled backward, falling butt first into muddy puddles. As the gator advanced, Bernie flinched when the beast exploded from the lean-to, Massive shoulders rolled forward, broad head hung low, the creature rose to an inhuman height. But it was what the beast left behind under the lean-to that drew Bernie's eyes. It was a much smaller mass, something the larger creature had clearly been hunched over, maybe even guarding. Bernie could see it was a smaller version of the larger beast. It looked like a child, covered entirely in hair or fur. It was hard to tell in the flash of the moment, but it looked to be maybe about Bernie's size. Whatever it was, one thing was clear. It wasn't alive. As the larger beast burst from the lean-to, the small body flopped to the ground, lifeless and unmoving. Lightning flashed, and Bernie was yanked back into the moment. A massive alligator sprinted from the left, jaws gaping open and jagged teeth cutting through the rain. From Bernie's right, a giant, humanoid-shaped mass of hair and muscle barreled forward, simian-like jaw dropping open, bellowing an incomprehensible rage. Bernie scampered backward, hands sinking into the mud, thick boot soles slipping as they found no traction on the soddened earth, until the two creatures collided. Alligator and beast crashed into each other, the beast doubling over as its meaty hands, yes, those were hands and thumbs, Bernie could plainly see, grasped at the gator's jaws. They tumbled and rolled, sending water and mud spraying everywhere. Bernie's back pressed into the trunk of a pine tree at the edge of the clearing. She clutched her hunting knife in both hands, holding it out in front of her, the hooked blade aimed at the two monsters waging war in her front yard. The gator bellowed and twisted, jaws clamping down on the beast's hairy leg. The beast roared in pain, balling its fists together and smashing them down on the gator's eyes. Woomph! 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 The beast twisted and cried out in pain, tumbling sideways into the ground as rain and mud splattered from the impact. Bernie could see the flesh caught in the gator's teeth twist and tear. A dark red spilling down the gator's jaw and onto the earth. The beast roared in agony and flung itself forward. It grabbed the gator's snout with both hands, prying at its jaws to pull them apart. It huffed and growled, and the jaws shifted. Bernie flashed on a long-forgotten detail. A typical alligator had a bite force of something around 3,000 psi, which meant the beast must have been stronger than... The beast drove the heel of its massive foot into the gator's side, and that was enough to finally pry open the gator's jaws. The beast yanked its leg free, pulling its feet under it as the gator hissed and snapped, grabbing a mouthful of hair. The beast lurched, and the hair tore away in a bloody patch. The creature rolled, tumbling forward, the gator snapping after it. In a powerful twist of its torso, the beast hurled sideways and grabbed the alligator's tail. The beast rose up to its full height, planting its feet as the gator tried to curl around, snapping its jaws in a manic, violent fury. The beast tightened its grip on the gator's tail and, with an angry bellow, began to spin. The blade of Bernie's hunting knife wavered in front of her as she watched, transfixed. The beast's strength and sheer momentum lifted the massive gator off the ground, spinning it through the air and crashing brutally into a nearby pine tree. Wood and bones cracked loudly in front of Bernie as thunder cracked even louder overhead. The gator snapped its jaws, twisting and hissing. The beast huffed and tightened its grip, pulling the alligator back into the middle of the clearing as wind and rain lashed against skin, scales, and matted hair. The gator thrashed and twisted violently, finally pulling its tail free from the hulking beast. The gator spun across the ground in a chaotic flurry, the tail once gripped by the beast, sweeping like a battering ram at the beast's legs, tripping it backward. In a flash, the gator spun and clamped down on the beast's massive, sinewy, muscular shoulder. The beast bellowed in pain, flailing for some kind of grip on the gator behind it, but it was on its back and at a disadvantage to those vice-like jaws. With a shaking hand, Bernie wiped the water from her eyes. With the beast flat on its back, she noticed for the first time that the creature had pronounced breasts. It was a female, and this realization pulled Bernie's gaze to the smaller, lifeless body still under the lean-to. It was the creature's child. The beast cried out in an agony that transcended language. Bernie looked from the dead juvenile to its mother, that dense hair on its shoulder slick with blood pouring from the alligator's bite. Another flash of insight struck Bernie. Could the strange clump of hair she found in the alligator's nest belong to the beast or the juvenile? Had they pilfered the alligator's nest, prompting the mother gator to attack? Maybe that was how the juvenile died. The beast's powerful bellow wavered and trembled as the pain became too much for it to bear. The rain continued to cascade, and Bernie found her gaze locked with the beast trapped in the alligator's bite. Dark brown eyes stared back, and Bernie immediately felt a pang of empathy. This was an intelligent creature, a mother who had lost her child. With her back against the tree, Bernie clenched her teeth and pushed herself to her feet. She stretched her arm out in front of her, knife aimed at the struggling creatures in the clearing. With its jaws locked in a death grip, a cold reptilian eye tracked Bernie as she took a cautious step forward. A bolt of lightning cracked, searing the air in the clearing, and a nearby tree exploded from the impact. The beast managed a mournful moan. Its life was beginning to fade. Bernie took another step, using both her hands to change her grip on the hunting knife so that it pointed down from her closed fist. In a split second, Bernie found herself moving before she had even made up her mind. This time, she let loose the battle cry. This was Bernie's home. Bernie jumped, skidded, and tumbled onto the alligator's back. The reptile started to buck and twist underneath her, but in a swift, brutal slash, Bernie brought the hunting knife down with every bit of force she could muster jamming it into the gator's skull. Thunder boomed. The beast shifted and reached for the alligator's jaws, prying them off its shoulders. Bernie tugged at the knife, but it was stuck. As the beast pulled itself free from the jaws, "God, that smell! She's so big!" Bernie rolled off the back of the gator and scuttled to the edge of the clearing. The beast pushed itself up and grabbed the alligator's jaws, lifting the reptile by its head. The beast let out an anguished roar and then pried the gator's jaws open. One hand gripped on each jaw, muscles rippling underneath matted hair as she stretched the jaws apart. A sickening crack snapped through the clearing, and Bernie watched as the alligator's lower jaw fell limp. The beast dropped the dead gator to the ground. Another distant boom of thunder. The rain eased to a sprinkle. The beast huffed in exhaustion. Bernie pressed her back into another tree, carefully watching the creature's every move. It bent forward and grabbed the gator's tail. The beast straightened, almost laboriously, and walked to the lean-to, dragging the dead gator in its wake. Before ducking under the thatched roof, the beast glanced back at Bernie. Their eyes met once again. The beast sucked in a short breath, barking softly at Bernie. A moment later, "Herk, glursh!" Bernie's hunting knife landed at her feet after the beast yanked it out of the alligator's skull. A piece of the reptile's brain was still caught in the hook. With her eyes locked on the beast, Bernie leaned forward, fingers seeking out the handle of the knife. The beast moved to the back of the lean-to, pulling the gator in behind her, flipping it over to get at its soft underbelly. Hunting knife gripped in her fist, satchel of fish still over her shoulder, Bernie once again stepped cautiously toward the airstream. The beast grunted in a non-threatening tone. Bernie reached out and grabbed the handle of the airstream door before hesitating. This was her home. She took a deep breath to calm her nerves before slowly turning to face the beast. With deliberate, overt movements, Bernie carefully sheathed the hunting knife. The beast sat, hunched over in the farthest corner, back against the airstream. But the creature was now closer than ever, no more than 6 feet away. Intelligent, brown eyes tracked her movement, and Bernie felt her stomach drop as she appreciated the sheer size of the beast. Bernie already knew it was nearly as tall as the gator was long. Even with it sitting and hunched over, she was gobsmacked by its girth. Arms as thick as small tree trunks, fists that could have been boulders. Bernie took a small step forward, and the beast's lips parted, revealing simian teeth and sharp canines. Bernie held her hands up, palms out, to demonstrate she didn't mean any harm. The beast huffed sharply. Bernie's eyes shifted to the juvenile body between the beast and the alligator corpse. Now that she was closer to the body, Bernie could see the bite marks around its neck. The gator had killed the juvenile. Bernie was sure of it. She looked back at the beast and saw sadness in its eyes. I... Bernie's voice squeaked. She hadn't used it in so long. Her jaw kept working, but her brain didn't want to furnish any other words. The beast studied her with a curious expression. After another calming breath, Bernie squatted on her heels and pulled open the cinched bag. She grabbed one of the fish and, after banishing the doubt from her mind, held it out, offering a bass to the beast. Inquisitive brown eyes shifted from the fish to Bernie's face. Bernie chewed her lip. She let out a frustrated sigh. It had been 2 very long years since she had talked to anybody, and even before, it wasn't like she had been a conversational savant. The beast lifted one of those boulder-sized hands, and the movement, as subtle as it was, startled the young girl. She fell backward, catching herself with a hand on the wet earth. Bernie grunted, annoyed with how she had reacted. She wiped the back of her hand across her mouth, jaw set. This was her home. Bernie pushed herself forward, stretching the offered fish out to the beast. With fingers as thick as Bernie's arm, the beast reached out and accepted the bass. It grunted quietly. Bernie rocked back on her haunches, that icy grip on her heart finally loosening. This was Bernie's home. But the beast was welcome, too.